Parenting for the Everyday, a podcast dedicated to meeting parents in the trenches of parenthood. We explore how our faith fits into our parenting. With the help of our guests, we are seeking practical tips on how the gospel can speak into our day-to-day parenting. From the easy stuff to the hard stuff, we want to talk about it all.
Welcome to Parenting for the Everyday. I'm Holly Dyke-Andrew.
And I'm Becca Alvarez.
And today we are in part one of a 3-part series on mental health. We are talking about anxiety, which is one of those topics that has so many different avenues and conversations connected with it. We have done an episode before on anxiety. If you didn't get a chance to listen to it with Jonathan Holmes, it's definitely worth a listen. We really talk about what anxiety is, really define it. This time we want to talk about more practical tips as parents. How do we equip each other and ourselves and our kids to navigate anxiety at different stages of our life? So I'm going to go ahead. We have 2 guests with us today, and I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Just tell us who you are, what you do, and why this topic matters to you.
Hi, I'm Christina Hawarda. I am married to Mike Hawarda, who is a pastor here on staff. We are a new family of 5, which is really fun to say. We have a son, Brayden, who's 7, a 2-year-old whose name is Kason, and then we have a new baby girl, Briella, who's 2 months old. I am a licensed independent social worker and a clinical counselor. I actually practice here at CCC out of the block, seeing children and adolescents.
Yes.
And I am Shannon Miller. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. I work at Emerge Counseling Ministries in Akron, and I'm also a member at CCC. My husband and I have been coming here probably 17 years at this point, so this is a huge part of our life. My husband and I actually met here in the block.
I love that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, a long time
That's
ago.
So fun.
So it's really cool just to be back here. And we are licensed foster parents, so we're presently waiting for our first placement. Yeah. We're doing 12 and up, so people think we're a little crazy because teenagers are my favorite thing. But yeah, so we're really excited with whatever God's going to do with the next stages of our lives.
I love that. You don't hear that very often. I love that.
Yeah.
The topic anxiety seems like it's more and more relevant just in our day-to-day lives, but especially in adolescence and even younger than that. What makes the topic of anxiety something that you both are passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what you're saying, like the more I've been in practice, the more I'm seeing it in my office. I think current stats are 1 in 4 children and 1 in 3 teenagers.
Wow.
And girls are twice as likely as boys. So I think especially with COVID and then, social media, like there's lots of factors, right? But I think that the rates of anxiety are only climbing. So its need is to be addressed is greater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually going to say that also. Since COVID, like numbers of teenagers that I've seen coming in, struggling with any number of things, but primarily anxiety and eating disorders has been crazy. And I think just because of all of the unknowns that went along with COVID, when kids don't have a lot of control, anxiety is more likely to be an issue. And COVID, nobody had any control. So not even their parents who they're looking to for that sense of security and control, they didn't even have it. So I think that this day and age that we're in has a lot more complications than we're used to in that area.
Yeah. So if somebody walks into your office and they would be diagnosed with anxiety, what kind of symptoms would you see to be able to make that diagnosis or to be able to treat that? What are you looking for?
Well, I think I look for any number of things. I mean, obviously, like as a licensed counselor, we have certain criteria, but especially with kids and teens, some of the things that I see, overthinking is a huge one, and that can have an impact both like on their ability to focus at school, but also on their ability to fall asleep. I always check in, how is sleep for you? Oh, well, I lay up hours trying to fall asleep, but I can't because my brain won't shut off. I hear that phrase a lot. And like fidgeting, the foot is tapping all the time. And I think just a general sense of irritability too, just what frustration, I'm not being heard. People don't understand what it is that's going on internally. Half the time they don't even understand what's going on. So that can kind of show up in how they interact with their parents, with their peers. It can affect all different areas of their lives.
I think it could be really helpful to know like what's happening physiologically when you experience anxiety, because I think it can speak to a lot of the symptoms that you see, and then also how to address it. So hang with me for a minute. I might kind of
walk me through it. Yeah, no.
So in his wisdom, God gave our bodies emergency response systems that are kicked into gear when we feel afraid. So this whole process has started with our amygdala. So our amygdala is this tiny little almond-shaped piece in the back of our brain that can perceive a threat before our prefrontal cortex, our like logical thinking, planning part of our brain up front, can even process it. So once our amygdala perceives a threat or danger, it will then kick into gear. And so your survival skills have started. Your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight mode has taken over. And so when that happens, blood actually shifts away from your prefrontal cortex. And so your thinking and your logical planning brain starts to shut down. So to those irrational thoughts, to thoughts that kind of start and then snowball or spiral, like people will say, oh, I spiraled, to it getting stuck in this like continuous loop where you're just like fixated on this one worst case scenario, and then that becomes your reality. So that's what happens with your thinking. Your brain, your logical brain shuts down. But then your body is also in fight or flight mode, right? So if that's the case, you are getting ready to either fight or to literally run. So your adrenal glands start secreting adrenaline. Your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing starts to go up. Your pupils actually dilate. Your blood flow starts to shift in your body to your larger muscle group. So it's going to like your arms or your legs so you can fight or
literally
you can
run. Yeah.
Yep. Your muscles are tensing. It moves away. Your blood is moving away from your digestive system. So, that can impact the way that digestion is happening, stomach aches, things like that. Blood actually leaves your skin so that if you were to get cut, you wouldn't bleed as much. Like, isn't that wild? Like, we are fearfully and wonderfully made, y'all. Mm-hmm. So if you kind of play that out, you can see some of the symptoms, right? Like fast heart rate, your chest getting tight and it's harder to breathe. With little kids, I'll say it's like you have butterflies in your stomach, but not the good kind. Or if you have adrenaline pumping through your body, it's like you have this extra energy that doesn't feel good or you don't know what to do with it. Or people get pale, right? Because your blood is leaving your skin. Or you can get lightheaded, or like your up close vision starts to get blurry because your pupils are dilated. So if you have test anxiety and you're looking at your paper, you're like, it's all fuzzy, like it's doing weird things with the vision. Lightheaded, headaches, clammy, things like that.
That's wild. Yeah. All those physical things happen from anxiety.
Yeah.
And what's so crazy is with all those physical symptoms, it adds to such like exhaustion and overstimulation and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I've been reading a lot of postpartum things because of having a little babe. But the same thing happens when your infant is crying, is that you go into a fight, flight, or freeze mentality. And that's part of the reason that moms can feel so exhausted, not just because they're not sleeping at night, but also because you're almost constantly in this overstimulation and fight or flight response. So your whole body's reacting. It's just a fascinating thing. Yeah, it's crazy.
And I think it's important to recognize too, like even if it's not an actual threat, it can perceived threat can throw your body into all of that also. So just being mindful, like as parents, even if you know that the situation is safe, if your child perceives in their body that it's not, they could still be experiencing those reactions.
Yeah, for sure. Like your amygdala is notorious for false alarms, and your brain creates neural pathways. So the more frequently you interpret a type of situation as a threat, the easier and the quicker it is your brain then travels that neural pathway to say, oh, this is a threat or this is dangerous. So when you're anxious, your amygdala is activated and you go into fight or flight mode.
And if you stay at that elevated state of risk for a long, long time, it throws your whole body out of balance too. So then you can be more likely to have autoimmune disorders and some other chronic illness just because you've been at such a heightened level of cortisol for so long.
Yeah. So in my mind, which already I'm learning is not right all the way, but in my mind, when I think of someone with anxiety, I am thinking a little bit of those panic attacks, and it's good to know kind of the physical reasons behind it. But I guess my question is, does anxiety always present the same way in kids? So are we always going to see it, okay, they have a panic attack, their stomach hurts, or can you have a child who is acting out maybe behaviorally, and then it could actually be linked to anxiety? So is there a cookie cutter, this is anxiety, like symptoms, or is it way broader than we think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's broader. Like, while your body may experience similar things, the way it plays out is different, right? So, I think Shannon hit on some of that stuff earlier. Like, it could be perfectionism or wanting to have more control, having the incessant questions because you're thinking, if I have more information, then I can feel more in control. People pleasing, right? Like, those are more obvious. But I also think ADHD gets misdiagnosed sometimes, and it's actually anxiety, because if you have all those things going on, you're fidgety, you're having a hard time concentrating, you can't sit still, sometimes you can look impulsive. I think also like anger or depression, it can come out in that way, because if you have all of this going on all the time under the surface, then you can lash out, or you are overwhelmed. So then you start to shut down and you get tearful and you isolate. And so I think the way it plays out can look very different. But I also think it's important to say, like, there's a continuum, right? Like, there's a book that I'm reading recently that talks about anxiety on a worry continuum. And so if it starts with fear, and then moves to worry, and then moves to anxiety, and then an anxiety disorder, you can experience anxiety without having an anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
So,
like, can you have situational anxiety? Like, could it be like, oh, this one situation I'm really anxious about, but I don't have a diagnosis of anxiety?
Usually with a diagnosis, we're looking at simplified three things: intensity, duration, usually it has to be present for at least 6 months, and then if it's impacting your daily life, like interfering with daily functioning.
My husband would say that I have parking anxiety, parking situational anxiety, because I will leave a place if there's not parking. Like, I can't do it. Yes, it's ridiculous.
We're going to work through that.
Yeah. Avoidance strengthening anxiety, Becca.
Christina, I love that you started with some of the physiological things that happen in our body and just the God-given design of our body. What role does faith play in anxiety?
I think that's can be a really loaded question oftentimes. If we say that faith does play a role, does that invalidate the physiological stuff that is going on? And I think that faith can be an instrument of healing, but it can also be an instrument of condemnation. And it really depends, like, what we as the church, what we as parents do in implementing faith in the lives of our kids. And I think that, for me personally, anxiety has been something that I've struggled with for a long time. And I found a lot of hope and healing that, like, when I don't feel in control, I know that God is in control. But that doesn't always stop the fight and flight reactions that are going on in my brain. And so sometimes having somebody that can come alongside me and can validate, like, even though, like, it's just a perceived threat, you're not really in danger, your body's still reacting as if you are. And so let me just validate, like, that is your experience, and let's figure out a solution to fix that. And that the solution can include prayer. It can include being in a faith-based environment, but it can also include, like, maybe we should go talk to a counselor and do some more tangible things to work on that physiological part also.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember the fact that, like, we serve a God who is never anxious and who welcomes us openly to himself when we feel anxious. And I think, real peace only comes from the Lord, and in his loving kindness, like, that's what he offers us. I think if we think about anxiety as a desire to control, or even like a hope that things will always look or go a certain way, or in contrast, fear that they won't, we know as believers that, like, we are not in control and that this world is broken, right? Like, sin has fractured everything, and so things will never go exactly how we want them to. And so anxiety needs truth, because anxiety distorts. Anxiety distorts the truth. It distorts our thinking. It lies to us. And so our anxiety needs truth, and needs truth to be reminded in those moments. So, even things like you were saying, like, we serve a God who is good, who is in control, who loves us and promises to never leave us. In fact, he says he draws near to us in our suffering, and he will work all things out for the good of those who love him. So that doesn't mean that it will be the good that I am picturing in this moment, right? But the trust that, like, okay, I am not in control, but the Lord is. And so I think even with our kids, like, the more that we can, lead our kids to Jesus in those moments, to learn how to come to him with our anxieties, and then also personalize the gospel to them in those moments as much as we can, I think is really important. So it doesn't negate any of the other coping skills and things that the Lord has also given us in wisdom to utilize when we need them, but it's important that our faith is always integrated into every part of our lives.
Yeah, I think that's a big fear that I see a lot with clients that I work with that have anxiety. You know, if I'm anxious, does that mean that my faith in the Lord is not enough? And a lot of guilt and shame that can come from that. And so I think a huge part is just making sure that like we are giving people an accurate picture of what grace in Christ looks like. It doesn't mean that you will never struggle again just because you've trusted your life to the Lord, but you know, what do we do in those struggles? How do we allow God to be present and walk with us through those things?
Yeah. So I feel like we're starting to kind of go into the territory of, as parents, how can we help equip our kids to walk through this? And the next question is kind of two-part, because one, I think we need to just really quick identify when we need to see someone else. So when do we as parents need to recognize, hey, I need some help. So I need to go reach out to a counselor or make an appointment with someone. And then there are also going to be times when I have a kid who's struggling with anxiety over a particular thing or for a particular season. So you mentioned like speaking truth to them and showing them the gospel. Can you give us some practical ways that as parents we can do that well? Or even, this is a three-part question. Is it just in the moment of anxiety, or even are there things we should be doing, you know, at other times?
Yeah. I think when to get help, I think some of that's kind of like, listen to your gut a little bit. I think, getting help is never a bad thing. I think you can even ask your kids. Sometimes kids would want to have somebody else to talk to, just a safe place where they feel like you don't know anything about me. This feels like easier to talk through things. Especially as kids get older, like if we're talking adolescence, to have that safe space that's going to stay private, is judgment-free, just feels a little bit safer.
Yeah.
It can be hard to talk to your parents about stuff sometimes. No knock to parents. It's just that's how adolescents go, So to bring in other voices, like that's only helpful. If you're noticing like a very, like I said at the beginning, like duration, like if this has been going on consistently where you feel like it's really pervasive, like it never lets up or it's just constantly showing back up. I think one of the things with anxiety that's diagnosable, especially, is when you feel like it's kind of whack-a-mole, like the content actually isn't the issue, but it's like you're just always anxious and it's whatever your anxiety can grab onto. And so when you start to see that, I think that can be an indicator of like, hey, this isn't just a situational anxiety. It's like anxiety that will pick any situation to jump onto.
Okay.
I think for coping skills, I think if you think back to kind of what's going on in your brain and your body when you're anxious, I think something that parents unintentionally, because you didn't go to school like I did for the things that I went for, is they try to address the thinking. And if your prefrontal cortex is actually shutting down, like you are unable to logically think. So before you address any of those thoughts and do more of that kind of coping, you need to actually address just your body and your brain.
The physical part, you mean?
The physical part, exactly. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. So breathing is really helpful in this. 20 seconds of deep breathing actually can reset your amygdala. So there's different types of breathing techniques that you can do. A popular one is 4-7-8 breathing. It's like a breathing cadence. So you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, and then you hold for 7 seconds, and then you breathe out for 8 seconds. Some people call it combat breathing because soldiers actually use it in combat. Square breathing, or with younger kids, I'll do rainbow breathing. So you're actually like taking your finger and on your leg, you're drawing a square or a rainbow. And so as you go across, you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. And then when you go down, you hold for 4. And then across, you breathe out for 4. And then up, you hold for 4. Or with like a rainbow. I tried to do that with one younger kid, and he just couldn't think and do it all the same time, So then you just do rainbow, like breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4.
With breathing real fast, if for the mamas or dads of toddlers too, if you do it, they're likely to do it. So often if Ezekiel's like really, really worked up and we're in the middle of a tantrum, I will just start breathing really hard of just like breathing all the way in and pushing out with my mouth. And then he'll slowly start to do it with me. And then we both kind of calm down. And if you're feeling like you're ramping up as a parent, that can be really, really helpful for you too, because it's also calming you down as you're imitating for your little to calm them down as well.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes with even younger kids, not toddler, but like in between kind of the like 10 and toddler age, we'll do like smell the flower, blow out the candle. Yeah. So anything that you can just kind of like get them to focus on to then be doing that in through your nose, out through your mouth, deep breath, diaphragm breathing.
Once the body is calm and you have a bit of an older child, do you do some talking after that, or do you just calm the body? Like, are there words that you would encourage parents to use after something like that?
Or maybe not use even.
Or not use, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you need to know your kid, right? Like some kids are more, I need time, like, and need to internally kind of handle it before I can then process it. And other kids like are ready to go in the moment. I think kind of the combo of empathy and questions is really helpful. So I think something that you kind of alluded to earlier on is how, you know, we can see a situation and be like, that's not a threat, like, you know, and so I think validating and then following up with problem solving type questions is really helpful. And validating doesn't have to mean you're affirming the truth of the scenario, because like we said, anxiety distorts, but you're seeing your kid, you're noticing the feeling and you are acknowledging that. So like, I'm sorry, that must be really hard. What do you want to do about that? Right? Like, don't fix it for them, because I think the more that you can help them build their own internal voice and ability to problem solve, you're helping them. It's like you're teaching them how to fish, you know, like you're building the skill to do it in the future. I think even questions like, what do you think Jesus would say to you in this moment? Or like, what would God want you to do in response to that, right? So it's like you're helping them begin to create this framework for how do I start to think through these things? But you're doing it with them, right? Mm-hmm. And in doing that, you're showing them like, you're capable. Like, I don't need to fix this for you. I know that you can do it.
So that when you're not there, they can start to say, okay, I remember, what would God want me to do?
Yes. So like even, again, then going back to toddlers, like separation anxiety is a very developmentally appropriate thing. And so what I'll do with my kids is we'll kind of start with me being that voice. So if we're driving to church, I'll say, okay, we're going to go to church. Mommy's going to drop you off in class. You get to play with your friends. I'm going to go to service. And then when it's done, I'm going to come back and get you, because mommy always comes back. So then the next week we come, I'm going to say, okay, we're going to church. Mommy's going to go into service. You're going to stay in your class. But then what's going to happen? And then I would let Case and then respond that back to me, because I'm helping him build that internal voice. So he doesn't need me to be the one always speaking it to him. He now has it.
And he can remind himself when I'm feeling scared. Mommy always comes back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and just going off of when you have teenagers, sometimes how you approach them is going to be a little bit different than the younger kids. I find that a lot of what I do just in my job as a counselor is a whole lot of education, which I was not expecting when I first went into that field, but helping them to understand what is going on in their own bodies, you know, why are they experiencing what they are? So I'll talk all the time, like, you know, when that fight or flight, I'll explain that a little bit to them. And like, you know, when you're feeling like that, you have a vagus nerve, goes all the way up to the calming center of your brain. You know, don't have to use clinical terms with young people. But when you put pressure on that nerve, it tells your brain it's time to calm down. So when you're feeling really tense, that's what we need to do. The best way we can do that is to inflate your lungs as big as they're going to go. And I will actually encourage like a certain position to sit in when breathing, because we want them to stomach breathe. But if you tell somebody who's like really panicky and anxious, like, oh, you need to breathe in this certain way, that's just going to make them more tense and anxious. But if you sit with your hands behind your knees, and it brings your posture forward a little bit, and sitting right in that position, taking a deep breath, it will automatically come out of their stomach. So that can help. And if they're fidgety and anxious with their hands anyway, if the hands are under their knees, that can also be beneficial for that. So I use that position a lot. I also use tapping. I don't know if that is something that is familiar with anybody, but we're tapping on certain acupuncture points as bilateral stimulation for your brain, and it helps to reduce that cortisol level, so that stress hormone. I think they've done some studies on it that if you do tapping for a 9-minute span of time, it can reduce your stress and anxiety by up to 40%. which is huge if you're somebody who is prone to anxiety, panic attacks, that sort of thing. There's an app called the Tapping Solution that I recommend a lot. On the app, it has a ton about like the science and the research behind why it works, but then it also has guided meditations that you could do with your kids if you wanted. And they've got them for a bunch of different things: sleep, anger, irritability, fear of flying, like all of the different things. And once you're kind of familiar with that, you can use the tapping with or without the meditations, but it's just a nice resource if you want to know more about that. I've had huge successes with my clients. I'll do it in session with them, have them do it on their own time. And for the ones that are really anxious, overthinking is keeping them from sleeping. Doing one of those before bed can be a really good part of a bedtime routine. And I've done it personally when you're staring at the ceiling and you know you have to be up early but can't fall asleep. I will do that, and in 5 minutes or less, I feel physically tired because that tension that I'm carrying, that cortisol, is decreased from where it was. So it can be hugely helpful.
I'm going to say I love those tips and tricks because not only are those really applicable for older kids, teenagers, but also for parents.
Yeah.
Because I think that something else that we know about anxiety is that it can often transfer from parent to child. So if you are feeling pretty anxious and feel like you are giving some of that to your child, it might be a good thing to start practicing some of this. Other than some of those coping mechanisms that parents can also use, what are some other things that you guys would say would be a good thing to recognize if you're a parent and you feel like you're an anxious parent, that you could recognize like, oh, I might be transferring some of this worry onto my child. I need to stop, or some of those kind of just signs that will tell you I need to pause in order to help my child out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I read recently is that if you're an anxious parent, your child is 7 times more likely.
Wow.
Or you're 7 times more likely to pass it on to your child. And I think if you weren't an anxious parent or person before, when you become a parent,
It increases.
brings it out.
Chances are high.
Yeah. Because you get the things that you care deeply about and you want to do well tend to be the things that kind of bring anxiety out in you. So I think building our own self-awareness, I think noticing if you have any telltale signs, right? Like for me, I've noticed if my chest starts to feel tight, I'm getting anxious. So whether that's like my child is not listening and behaving, or my baby's crying and then my other child needs something from me, like whatever it may be, I can tell if my chest gets tight, I'm feeling anxious. And so I try to pay attention to that, right? And everyone is going to have something that you can notice, oh, this is my first signal that my body is starting to react in this way. And so for me, like I will do the 4-7-8 breathing. That's what I like, because I feel like I'm holding my baby, I can do it. Like it's very easy to grab onto. And then once I do that, I also really like the verse Isaiah 26:3, which is, you, O Lord, keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. And so that just like centers my mind of like, okay, like the Lord promises me perfect peace if my mind is centered on him. And so I think the more that you can do that as a parent is helpful, one, to help calm yourself down so you're not reacting to your kids out of an irrational place. Two, if you can model that with your kids, like that is very helpful. Sometimes I'll do that with Brayden. Like I'll say, okay, I notice I'm starting to feel really stressed out in this moment. And so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to take some deep breaths. And I'll show him that I'm doing that, because our kids learn from seeing more than they do from, talking. And then I think you know how to help your kids in those moments as well, if you are already practicing it within yourself. And you can notice it in your kids more if you're paying attention to your own anxiety.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up, I just have one more question. When you have a child that is maybe a little bit more fearful or a little bit more anxious, how do you know when to push and when not to? So, I have a child that would his default would be to try nothing. And so I've had to kind of learn to be like, okay, nope, I'm going to kind of make you do this to show you that you can do it. But I struggle all the time with the idea of like, did I push too much? Did I not push enough? And so is there kind of some guidance you could offer to parents to help them to know when to push their kid and when to really let them have their space?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that can be a tricky dance. And again, I think your gut is important to kind of know like what is my child capable of in this moment and how much can I push. But I also think like I kind of joked earlier, avoidance strengthens anxiety, right? So the more we avoid something, the more we think we have to avoid it. And again, if you go back to our brains, like we've then created this neural pathway that tells us whenever I come up against this thing, I need to avoid. And so there's actually a term in cognitive behavioral therapy called activate to generate, which is basically this idea that in order for us to change the stress response in our amygdala, we need to put ourselves in the stressful situation, right? You need to activate your amygdala to generate growth. So, I think there's a couple of things to think about when you're doing that, right? I think one is expect worry and prep your kids, right? So if you're going to say like, okay, I understand that this is going to make you feel nervous. We know that that is going to happen. We know anxiety is going to pop up. So we are going to be prepared. If and when anxiety pops up, what are we going to do? So you kind of arm them with their plan of like, what coping skill are you going to use? Grounding techniques is another one we didn't talk about, but those are really helpful in anxiety because they kind of, if you think of anxiety making you feel very lofty, grounding kind of grabs you by the ankles and pulls you back to the present moment, grounds you. And so anything sensory related can be really grounding. So like my high school students, I'll say, go to the bathroom and wash your hands because the cold water on your hands can be really grounding. Or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a really popular one. You're doing 5 things you see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. And when I do that with kids, I'll say like really lean into it. So if I'm doing my jeans, I feel my jeans, and I'm going to rub my thumb against my jean and really think about that sensation. And what can be helpful in that is then you can learn what sensation is most powerful for you, and then you can lean into that and kind of streamline it, right? So back to the question, if you know your son is going to go do something that makes him feel scared and touch is really helpful, then you can buy silly putty and he can have that with him. And then he can start using that as a way to ground and calm himself. So you're prepping them. You're expecting worry, so you know how to respond to it when it shows up. And then I think you do it gradually, right? So it's not like, okay, I'm afraid to swim, so I'm just going to throw you in the water, right?
Sink or
It's
swim.
like, okay, what are the steps that we can break this into so that you can build your confidence, build your ability to say, oh, when I'm anxious, I don't have to run away. Like I can work through this, and then I can build my confidence to know, like, I can do it. It's resiliency, right? So I think you definitely should be pushing your kids, but it's just doing it in ways that's not like just shoving them into it, you know?
Yeah, and I think also empowering your kids to know themselves. Something that I say all the time to my clients is your feelings are always valid, even if they aren't always rational. And so getting into that headspace of like, I can validate that you feel what you feel, but that doesn't always mean that that's based in truth. That anxiety, you think you even said, like, it can distort not only like our physical body's reactions, but mentally in our thought process. Is this based in truth or is this based in fear? And trying to reorient your brain in that way. And I would say also giving some empowerment, giving some choices where you're able to give choices. Obviously, like with the younger kids, especially, like, okay, we're not just going to let you choose everything. Right. But, okay, would you like this for a snack or would you prefer this for a snack? Because then they have little bits of control and that can help to reduce anxiety. Or with teenagers, 2 of these are both safe options for you. You can have the power to choose which of these you want to go with. And also letting them know like what the schedule is so that they can mentally prepare for that. I think the unknowns that might pop up tend to exasperate some of those feelings of anxiety. So just making sure that you as a parent can be aware of like, I know my child, I know that unknown things that pop up might be anxiety provoking. Let me give them as much forewarning as I can so that they can deal with that. Having the game plan is really good. And also I ask the kids, when you're feeling anxious, what is something that you need from me? Do you need that space and time to just calm down with your silly putty? Do you need me to be here to listen? Would you like me to give you like helpful solutions on what you can do to fix this? Would you like me to do a tapping exercise or a breathing exercise with you? And so just giving them the power to say what they need can also be huge. Yeah, Mom, I need you to be here for this thing, or actually like I just need some like time and space to do my breathing on my own. So it just kind of depends on the kid. So letting them know themselves is huge in equipping them for the future.
Those are such great and helpful tips. Christina and Shannon, thank you so much for being here. I feel like I learned so much, and I really feel like this is helpful for any of our parents listening. Just a reminder that this is part 1 of a 3-part series. Make sure you stay tuned and tune in to our next one. Thank you, guys. This has been Parenting for the Everyday. If you or someone you know is struggling with anxiety, please go to our show notes and find resources available that can help.